I waited in my heart all these years, she whispered. At that moment, footsteps sounded behind them. An elderly man stood at the doorway, leaning slightly on a cane. His eyes were gentle, searching. Helen, he said softly. She turned for a second. Neither of them moved. The silence was heavy with decades of missed time. Lucas stepped back, realizing he was witnessing something extraordinary. William. Helen's voice barely rose above a whisper. He nodded, emotion flooding his face. I came back, but you weren't here. I thought you'd forgotten. Tears rolled down Helen's cheeks. I never forgot. The years between them seemed to disappear. Two young hearts, separated by war and time, finally stood face to face again. Red Heart. Lucas quietly slipped out of the room, leaving them alone. Outside, the lake shimmered under the afternoon sun, calm and timeless, just like the love that had waited half a lifetime to be found again. The room felt different now, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Helen stood frozen, staring at William like the world had folded back into itself. Decades of silence, regret, and unanswered questions were suddenly standing in front of her in human form. I waited for so long, she whispered again, her voice breaking. William stepped forward slowly, his cane tapping softly against the wooden floor. I came back the year after the war ended, he said. But you were gone. The inn was closed. No one knew where you'd gone. Helen closed her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek. I thought you never returned. I thought I was forgotten. A long silence filled the room, not empty, but heavy with everything they had lost. Lucas stood near the doorway, watching quietly. He had come here to heal his grandmother's sadness, but now he realized he was witnessing something far deeper. A love story paused by time, unfinished but never erased. William looked at Helen with trembling emotion. All these years I kept coming back, he admitted, every summer. Just in case you returned. Helen's breath caught. You did? He nodded. I never stopped believing you might walk through that door again. The room blurred as Helen covered her mouth, overwhelmed. The years she had carried alone suddenly felt lighter. Not because they were erased, but because she was no longer carrying them alone. Lucas quietly stepped forward and placed the old guest book on the desk. It was never really lost, he said softly. It was just waiting. Helen and William both looked at him, as if realizing the younger generation had unknowingly become the bridge between their past and present. Outside, the lake shimmered under a soft golden light. The storm from last night was gone, leaving behind a calm, peaceful sky. Helen finally reached out her hand. William took it, and in that simple touch, decades of waiting finally came to an end. Not everything in life returns, but some feelings never truly leave. Red Heart. The morning light poured gently through the curtains of Riverside Manor, softer than before. As if even the sun was careful not to disturb what had finally been healed, Helen sat by the window. This time, her silence wasn't heavy with sadness. It was calm, peaceful. William stood beside her, watching the lake shimmer in quiet gold. Neither of them spoke at first. There was no need for rushed words anymore. Time had already said enough. Lucas entered quietly, pausing at the door when he saw them. For a moment he simply observed. The weight that had followed Helen for years was gone. Are you leaving? Lucas asked softly. Helen turned toward him, a gentle smile on her face, one he hadn't seen in years. Yes, she said. But not the way I used to leave things behind. William looked at Lucas with gratitude. You brought her back here, he said, even without knowing what you were really doing. Lucas shook his head slightly. I just wanted her to be happy again. Helen walked toward him and placed her hand on his cheek, a familiar, loving gesture. You didn't just bring me here, she said softly. You gave me closure and something I thought I had lost forever. A quiet moment passed. Then Helen looked back at William. We don't have the past, she said gently. But we have today. William nodded. And that is enough. Outside, the lake reflected the sky like a mirror. Calm, endless, forgiving. Lucas stepped back, giving them space. He understood now that some stories don't end neatly. They simply find peace. As he walked out onto the balcony, the morning breeze touched his face. Behind him, two souls who had waited a lifetime finally sat together again. Not as young lovers from memory, but as two people who had survived time itself. And for the first time in decades, the manor felt truly alive. Sparkles. The end. Before we begin today's story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel if you enjoy emotionally driven stories that stay with you long after the video ends. These stories aren't loud or rushed. They quietly settle into your heart. Lucas hadn't planned the trip for any particular reason. At least that's what he told himself. The truth was simpler. He wanted to see his grandmother Helen smile again. Ever since his grandfather died 3 years ago, she had grown quiet, spending most afternoons gazing through the window of her cottage at the distant mountains. A sadness had settled in her eyes. So when Lucas suggested a weekend retreat by the water, she hesitated, then finally agreed. They drove northwest through winding mountain roads until the forest opened to reveal a tranquil sapphire lake and a small village called Willowbrook. At its heart stood an elegant old establishment, the Riverside Manor. The moment they entered, Helen slowed down, her gaze traveling across vintage photographs and oil paintings. When her eyes landed on the sweeping staircase, she paused as if recognizing something from long ago. Their room overlooked the lake. "I never imagined I'd see this view again," Helen murmured. "You've been here before?" Lucas asked. "Once a very long time ago." Outside, thunder rumbled. Rain began to fall. Helen whispered, "I met someone here." Later that evening, they went to the dining room. Helen studied old photographs longer than the menu. "This place feels kind," she said quietly. Soft piano music began playing in the lobby, a nostalgic melody from the 1940s. Helen froze. That song, it was playing the night I left Willowbrook. Tears formed in her eyes. Sometimes the heart needs to visit its old wounds before it can truly heal. As they returned to their room, she pointed down the hallway that used to be the ballroom. There were lanterns, music, and a promise I thought would last forever. The next morning, Lucas noticed a black and white photograph in the lobby. A young woman in a white dress stood beside a man in a naval uniform. The woman looked exactly like Helen. "Who is that?" Lucas asked. Helen's hand trembled. "His name was William. I met him here before the war." She explained how they fell in love and he promised to return after the war. "But the war changed everything. I thought he was gone. Your grandfather came later. I loved him too, but William stayed in my heart." Lucas realized this trip wasn't just a vacation. It was uncovering a hidden love story from decades ago. Lucas spent the rest of the morning exploring the manor's quiet corridors. The wooden floors creaked softly beneath his steps, and sunlight filtered through tall windows, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air. It felt as though time itself had slowed inside this place. At the end of one hallway, he noticed a small brass plaque beside a door, Room 217. Something about the number stirred a strange curiosity in him. He knocked lightly. No response. The door was slightly open, so he peeked inside. The room looked untouched by time. Vintage furniture, lace curtains, and a small writing desk by the window. On the desk sat an old leather-bound guest's book. Lucas carefully opened it. The pages were filled with signatures dating back decades. His eyes moved slowly until one name made his heart pound. William Carter, Summer 1943. Beneath it, written in delicate handwriting, "I'll return to this place. Wait for me." Lucas felt chills run down his spine, face with open mouth. He flipped the page and saw another entry just days later. "Helen Moore, Summer 1943. I'll be here always." Lucas quickly returned to their room, the book's words echoing in his mind. Helen sat quietly watching the lake. "Grandma, did you ever come back after that summer?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "No, life carried me elsewhere. I was afraid to return and face the silence." Lucas hesitated, then told her about room 217 and the guest book. Helen's eyes widened. Her lips trembled. Room 217. That was his room. Without another word, she stood up. They walked together down the corridor, her steps slow but determined. When they reached the door, she paused, her hand resting on the handle as if gathering courage. Inside, she moved toward the desk, her fingers brushed the old pages. Tears filled her eyes.